Hello, and welcome to the Clinical Care Options Infectious Disease Podcast. I'm your host, Jacqueline Meredith. In our series on RSV, today's episode focuses on the approval of 2 new RSV vaccines for older adults. Joining me is Dr. Helen Chu, Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Washington in Seattle. For the full online educational program, including downloadable slides, patient resource guides, and other podcasts in the series, please visit the link in the show notes for this episode. Now let's get started and hear what Dr. Chu has to say about this topic.
So there are several new RSV vaccines that are in development right now. The 2 main groups are the vaccines that are intended for pregnant persons, the maternal vaccines, and then the vaccines that are intended for older adults. First, I'll talk about the vaccines for older adults because those are far along. There are several vaccine candidates. All of them are based on using a portion of the surface protein of RSV called the pre-fusion antigen, the pre-F. And there are 2 that currently have been reviewed and approved by FDA, and that's the RSV pre-F3 and the RSV pre-F vaccine. And both of these were studied in phase 3 clinical trials in adults who are over 60 years of age. And the population that they studied were mostly healthy older adults, but did include those with comorbidities, including individuals who had chronic lung and heart disease. And that's really the population that's important to think about for vaccinations because they're at very high risk, both for RSV hospitalization, as well as long-term issues with RSV, including discharge to a nursing facility or worsening of their frailty. The next step after FDA approval is review by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. And really, the intention of that is to review the data and to make a recommendation for use in the US population. And it isn't until after the CDC review and the recommendation for use that this vaccine will be really widely available for use in the US population and paid for by health insurance. And the anticipated time for the CDC review is going to be in June of 2023, so coming up. And then what will likely happen is that once the CDC has reviewed the vaccine, then, and assuming that they do go ahead and approve the use of the vaccine, then the vaccines will be ready for use in the fall of 2023. And really, as you think about the fall and what we want to be thinking about in terms of rollout, I think that there have been studies now showing that very few people are really aware that RSV is a pathogen disease in adult populations. So just increasing awareness of that and having an understanding that RSV does cause severe disease in older adults, in particular those with these chronic conditions, including heart disease and lung disease. And then the way that this will be implemented is that it would be given as a vaccine in the fall prior to the RSV season. And when you think about when you might be giving it, it will likely time at around the same time as you would be giving your other fall respiratory virus vaccines. So that would be the flu vaccine as well as SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. The information that we have so far looks like these 2 vaccines, the flu vaccine and the RSV vaccine, can be given together and don't lead to significant decreases in how well the body responds to those vaccines. So the immunogenicity of these vaccines, that really you can give them together and that should be fine. I don't know that we have information yet about whether or not you can give it at the same time as the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, but that data is coming. So the way that these trials were conducted, they enrolled tens of thousands of individuals and followed them for at least 1 season. And now we have approximately 2 seasons worth of data on some of these vaccines. The thing that we saw in small numbers in these trials was a signal of Guillain-Barré, which is something that we worry about with some other vaccines that have been given in the past. But the numbers were very, very small. And really, to better understand whether or not there's going to be a risk of Guillain-Barré with these vaccines, it really is something that will have to be observed after the vaccines are licensed in the post-marketing period. The numbers were very small. It's hard to say whether or not the vaccines were associated with it. And the FDA really looked at this data and made the determination that based on what we knew, we really needed to do very good post-licensure surveillance. So following individuals who receive the vaccines and seeing if they do develop any Guillain-Barré-like symptoms over time. The other things to think about with the fall RSV vaccines for older adults is who to target in particular in terms of the highest risk populations. So as I talked about just now, those who with chronic heart disease, chronic lung disease. We also think of those with diabetes, those with end-stage renal disease on hemodialysis, people who live in nursing facilities. Those are all people who are at higher risk for severe disease due to RSV. The one population in whom this vaccine has not been well studied, or actually has not been studied at all in clinical trials to date, is the immunocompromised patient. So those who have cancer, who are receiving chemotherapy, or who are receiving immunomodulatory therapy. And those trials are happening now. But for now, that individuals who fall into those categories, there is no recommendation for use in those populations. It will be interesting to see whether people take it. And then it will also be interesting to see what happens, because we know that a lot of heart failure exacerbations and COPD exacerbations are triggered by RSV. So the RSV is never picked up as the cause. But what will happen is that I think we'll see those numbers go down as well. For the pediatric vaccines, the main two candidates that are furthest along are, again, an RSV pre-F vaccine, which is intended for use in pregnant persons to be given to the mother during pregnancy with antibody that's then transferred across the placenta to the baby so that it's protected at time of birth and has higher levels than it would otherwise have. And those higher levels then protect the baby from developing severe RSV disease. The other main strategy for protecting infants from severe RSV disease is a monoclonal antibody. And the main candidate that's furthest along right now is called nirsevimab. It is a monoclonal antibody that is given at birth or just before the RSV season in infants, all infants, term infants and preterm infants. And that antibody lasts for an estimated 4 to 6 months. And that antibody then protects the infant from developing severe RSV disease. So both of these products, the RSV pre-F vaccine and the monoclonal antibody, are currently under review by the FDA and do not yet have approval for use. It is anticipated that both of these will also be available either in the fall or winter of this year. And both of them will be given before the RSV season again. So the maternal vaccine will likely be given to pregnant women before the RSV season. And then the monoclonal antibody would also be given to infants who are born before the RSV season and potentially through the RSV season. I think what hasn't been fully worked out so far is how exactly to administer the vaccine or the monoclonal antibody, because when you think about giving a vaccine during pregnancy, you have to give it during a certain window of pregnancy for it to transfer across the placenta to the baby. And the timing of that has to be coordinated with when the RSV season is happening in the United States. So you really have to be giving it in a certain time of pregnancy, as well as in a period of time when you would be able to provide protection before the season for the baby. And so it gets very complicated. And then you have that in combination with the monoclonal antibody, which is given at birth for babies who are going to be born during the season, but may not need to be given necessarily to babies who are born right after the season. I think that the RSV adult vaccine will be challenging in terms of people not being aware that RSV causes disease in older adults. We won't have that problem with RSV in babies. I think most pediatricians, most OBs, most people know that RSV causes severe disease in young infants. It's the number one cause of hospitalization in infants in the United States. But the challenges will really be around how to give these two products, either how to give one or the other of them, or how one times the administration of either of these vaccines or monoclonal antibodies. And I think that's all yet to be worked out and will be quite a bit of a challenge. The data that we have so far about the RSV vaccine in pregnant women, or pregnant persons rather, is that there was two things that came up in review of the data from the clinical trials. The first is around simultaneous administration with Tdap vaccine, tetanus, diphtheria, and acellular pertussis vaccine. What will happen is that the RSV vaccine and the Tdap vaccine are really given right around the same time because the idea is to maximize antibody in the baby at the time of birth. But when you give them together, what happens is that the levels of the Tdap response are lower. So it's not clear what the implications of this are yet. How high do the levels need to be to protect the baby from pertussis? It's not known really what that number is. So it's not known if there's a reduction in those levels, whether or not that's going to lead to increases in cases of pertussis in babies. But this is, again, one of those things where we will have to monitor in the post-licensure period after the vaccines are approved and in use in the general population to understand whether or not we see any signals of increasing pertussis in infants. The other issue that has come up in the review of the data is an increase, or actually an imbalance, in the number of preterm births. So an increased number of preterm births in pregnant persons who received the vaccine compared to those who did not. This was not statistically significant. The numbers were very, very small, and it's hard to know what to do with the information, but it is something that is obviously concerning, given that there was another RSV pre-F vaccine that was also given to pregnant persons, which also had the same signal of preterm birth. And so the numbers are very, very small. It's not clear what this means. This study was also done during a period that was highly unusual because there was very little RSV circulation in the community because it was done during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there was very little circulation of most respiratory viruses. So again, one of those things where it's not known what this preterm birth signal means right now. And we probably need more people who are under surveillance to know what to do with that information. For the nirsevimab studies that have been done to date, those are given at birth to the infant. So they're not going to affect the pregnant person at all. And obviously there's no preterm birth signal with that. That's where things are right now. It's a lot of vaccines that are currently in review by FDA or approved by FDA, still need to be reviewed by CDC. But it is an exciting time for the field, and it is possible that in the next several months we'll have several products for use in two vulnerable populations, both older adults and for pregnant persons and their infants.
Thank you very much to our faculty, and thank you to our listeners for joining in. Please be sure to check back for more episodes on important infectious disease topics. Thank you, and have a great day.